This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.
Hey, it's John Hall. I find myself happily back in the Hudson Valley of New York, where we've done multiple podcasts in the past, but right now I'm at the namesake brewery for the region, the Hudson Valley Brewery, and I'll have Mike and Jason, who are the brewers and co-owners of the brewery, coming up in just a second. But first I want to say that as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality service and dedication to their customers' craft. For 25 years, G&D has led the way on custom, innovative solutions that match brewing customers' immediate and future needs. Thinking outside of the box, whether it's a simple relocation of the utility connections for a complex buildup or a ground-level design and engineering, G&D is ready to meet the challenge. Contact G&D Chillers today for your chiller sizing needs at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com. And this episode is also brought to you by the American Homebrewers Association, host of HomebrewCon, a 3-day event celebrating the best hobby there is. Visit homebrewcon.org to learn more. Guys, thanks for sitting down and joining me. And just so that our listeners can differentiate between the two of you, because it's not video, introduce yourselves, please.
I'm Michael from Hudson Valley Brewery.
Hi, and I'm Jason, Mike's friend and partner at Hudson Valley Brewery. I think we're friends.
We're friends. Yeah, we're still friends.
You guys are still friends. It's been a long road for you guys, and I mean it's starting in a. You guys started like a brewery in the back of a kitchen years ago together as home brewers and as friends, and now you've built up a new brewery and a new business as well. I mean, one sort of take me through those early days of what it was like to achieve the nano dream, as it were, and then scaling up. But I also think that it's so interesting when you think about are you guys still friends, or because when you start to mix business with friendship and with family and things, you often read these stories of the strain and the stress. I mean, once I leave, you guys might just go back to slap fighting each other. I don't know, but
it's
for
nice
at least
to have a break from the slaps.
I'm glad I could be here to help. But let's talk about all of that and just sort of dive in.
Yeah, well, we started even before the restaurant at Bacchus. We started on my front porch in New Paltz when we were in college.
You guys were at the SUNY school?
We were, yeah. Or recently graduated, I guess. I was doing a master's there. Jay was bartending at our bar down the street at Bacchus. And I don't even remember why we really started making beer. I think we just were having so much fun drinking it. I had been doing it like on and off since I was a little younger and through college, but never as seriously. I was never really pursuing it as a dream.
Were you just screwing around on like a Mr. Beer Kit, or did you have like
I'm kind of like a hobby whore, so I kind of like to build everything out and tech everything out. So I had the traditional 5-gallon Gatorade cooler mash tun and like welded little things that my friends help make for kettles. But we started like just drinking good beer. This was probably like 2009 or so, 2010. And there was this new like resurgence in sour beer, in IPA, and all sorts of like really creative and interesting things.
Yeah.
And I think we both share an ambition where it's like, we should do this. This is fun. For not only for beer, but for a lot of other things, which I think this company also reflects. But yeah, we started making beer there, and then Jason became the bar manager at Bacchus, and we were bringing in beers that we were making and just kind of drinking them at the bar. And then one day, the owners kind of approached us with an idea to make beer there and sell beer there, and that was the beginning of this whole thing. So I don't know.
Did you move your little rig down the street, or like?
No, we
did
built,
for a
we
while.
built a brewing
Remember,
system.
we
I
had
guess so in the back,
that stuff in the back for a while, but then we bought like a proper 3-barrel electric fired brewmation brewery. So it's 3 vessels, very simple.
Yeah.
1 hot water, 1 mash, 1 kettle, and we had a couple fermenters. And right from the beginning, we bought a couple of barrels too. So a lot of our first projects were sour farmhouse and sour IPA, basically.
And that was, I mean, that's ahead of its time, though.
At the time, yeah.
so,
So,
yeah.
I mean, I was going to say before you said that it was in the back of the kitchen. I think that's a little too generous. It was actually in the back of the kitchen, sort of behind the dishwashing station, behind the sort of spice racks. Was where we had our sort of row of fermenters. I think we had, what was it, maybe 5 or 6 3-barrel fermenters.
5, yeah.
And then sort of behind that,
Yeah.
there was an long, unused sort of maintenance room that had been collecting dust and bags of rotting concrete and all sorts of other
Fun.
like knickknacks that the bar just didn't use anymore. And I think that Bacchus is like it's awesome in that it's like a labyrinth of weird and somewhat unused rooms,
Yeah.
or at least it was at the time. And so we found this room. Originally it was supposed to be a walk-in cooler for the kitchen, and then they never used it for that, and it ended up just becoming like this storage space. And we opened at the time it was a walk-in cooler door to a storage space. We opened the door to the room and we were like, this is perfect.
Well, sure. I mean,
In fact,
it's sort of like built for
Yeah,
your
I mean, it
needs.
was tiny.
Yeah, of
it was
course,
200 square feet, but it had a floor drain already, and it was like
Oh, that's right. It did
close
have
to
a floor
water.
drain.
Yeah.
And it was sort of removed from the like normal operations of the bar, so we could sort of hide back there, which was kind of cool because a lot of what we were doing was, I think, a bit unusual, both for what was being served at the bar at the time, and then just generally what you can get.
Yeah.
You said before, sort of sour IPA or dry hop sours was definitely a relatively new thing, but there were some people who were doing it. I think that we were directly inspired by. I remember having
Who?
bottles of Anchorage,
yeah.
Gabe Fletcher,
Sure.
like
Tideman's
Bitter
Taker.
Monk and Tideman's Takers and stuff like that. And they weren't branded as sour IPAs, but they were certainly like, mixed culture beers. And
Jolly
I think
Pumpkin.
Jolly Pumpkin for sure, Bam beer and stuff,
Yeah.
Weizenbam and things like that, were some of the early influences on us.
Could you have so obvious, and then you did that successfully at Bacchus for a good couple of years, and then struck out on your own. You guys brought in a new business partner. You guys three-way team now, as it were. And was that a necessary step? Because these days, you talk to folks and it's either, they're still starting off that way, or they're going into a 10-barrel system, or they're starting off with, a 15 or even a 20-barrel system in some cases, depending on their level of funding. Would you have been able to do what you're doing here now without those first couple of years on your 3-barrel system at Bacchus?
I don't think so, and the reason, I'm not sure it's a matter of scale. I think it's a matter of technique and process. Like, we sort of learned how to brew professionally on that system under, I think, relatively limited means. We didn't have a lot of equipment or resources to bring to bear.
Yeah.
But we had an idea of what we wanted to make, and the sort of techniques that we developed at that time inform the way that we brew today, I think, directly. It's only now that we've managed to scale up and have, bring in a new business partner, John Anthony, and his family, and sort of have more resources to bring to bear, that I think that we've fully realized or come closer to realizing the original concept that we have, which is like sort of balancing the character of mixed culture fermentation with residual sugar from grain like raw wheat and oat and like things like milk sugar.
Yeah.
With like barrel aging and hops and the sort of hybrid style that we've come to be known for.
And that strikes me as deliberate from the beginning. And everything that I've read about you guys is because you walk into some breweries, and I go into a lot, and the styles are kind of all over the place, or it's just one style, but it's. I remember, talking to a brewer once and complimenting him on a beer, and he said, "God, it sells really well, but I hate making it. I wish I could make stouts all day long." And it's like, well, why don't you just make stouts all day long? Oh, nobody will buy them. They won't sell. And I should point out that we're sitting here in your office, in your small little office.
Sorry.
Thanks for sharing a mic, guys. If you need to get
it's all
that's
good.
fine. It's the boiler is next door, and the brewery is in full production mode as we're recording. So this is how life happens. But it seems like you guys were pretty deliberate from the beginning in saying this is what we want to make, and not necessarily bowing to industry norms or what you think people would want. It's, this is what you guys wanted to make, and this is, if people want to come by, great, and if not, also great.
I think we've always built our profile of beer, I think, around acidity. It was our first thing we really fell in love with, and that was in part, like we were saying before, inspired by Jolly Pumpkin and those beers we were drinking, because they were at that time so novel and so unique and so interesting that I think to start we pursued mixed culture beer. The thing we really wanted to do in the beginning was barrel ferment beer, blend saisons, and make pretty slightly sour beers. But then we started to experiment with fruits and hops and things in those beers and started to realize that it was more than acidity. It was a balance of acid and sugar. It was a balance of acid and hops. It was a balance of pretty much acid and all the other things in beer.
Yeah.
And I think as a process and as a way that our process has informed this brewery, we started so small and we had such limited resources. And I think it's fair to say that we weren't technically very good brewers. Our beers weren't coming out with the right gravity that we wanted. We didn't have any of those specs locked down. So we developed a process of blending because we needed to make the beer we wanted to make without necessarily all the tools to make it.
Yeah.
So we're able to then think of beers more as components to come together to make a final product. So we're making a beer that we have and still do call acid beer that's too acidic for anybody to drink, and then another beer that's maybe a higher finishing gravity with more sugar in it that we can put together to find the sweet spot, right?
So what is the sweet spot?
The sweet spot is I don't know, we could talk 3.5 or 6 pH with a high finishing gravity. It's a finishing gravity, I think, of a milk stout, 1040, 1035, but
Okay.
acidity of a Berliner Weiss.
But I also think that it's a matter of context, right? The sweet spot is a moving target.
Sure.
And I think that using what would normally be regarded as European sort of blending process, applying it to more contemporary, modern, American manufacturing, where it's fermentation in stainless and a higher degree of control over the blending components, is what I think makes our beer unique, because the blending components themselves are pretty dialed in at this point with regard to where we want residual sugar and acid and things like that to sit. But then we also have a pretty good idea of what we want the final product to be. And oftentimes, like I said, the sweet spot is going to be informed by what other ingredients are being used. And so the base beer is sort of always starts off with balancing, I would say, sort of 3 principal control points.
Okay.
The first of which, obviously, is alcohol, providing the bracing sort of supporting structure for the beer that's built on top of that. And then always in our beers, or rather in most of them, we're sort of balancing the residual sugar, like I said, from a variety of grains, and then also especially more recently milk sugar, with a profile of acid, typically from lactobacillus fermentation or from mixed culture fermentation, but all in stainless. And then sort of built on top of that trilogy, right, of control points is typically a type of fruit, a type of botanical, and a type of hops, right?
Yeah.
And so balance is a weird thing. It's it's not something that is I think pinpointable on paper. It has a lot more to do with having a discussion about the beer as it's coming together throughout the brewing and blending process, and that's just a discussion that we have. And I think that our personalities like sort of temper each other.
Yeah.
Mike is typically, I would say, more not traditional, but like seeks out like subtler kind of flavor arrangements, like appreciates subtlety in a way that I not that I don't, but that like it's just different. Whereas
Sure.
I'm like more interested in like outrageous flavor arrangements, right? And I think that we meet in the middle.
Yeah, I think
And
we
we've
use
gotten
stuff
way
to
better
find
at
other
working
things.
with each other in that regard.
For
you
sure.
know?
All right, I want to talk about outrageous flavors, but first I just have to say, because this is what we do now on the show, because people are listening, thanks so much. I have another sponsor read, that great beers are made from select ingredients. With BSG, you'll bring the world to your brew house with an unparalleled and diverse selection of ingredients from across the globe to just down the road. Their dedicated customer service team and industry experience provides you with the assistance you need in every step of the way. Let BSG be your supplier of choice for products essential to making great artisanal beverages so you can stay focused on your craft. For more information, visit them at bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact them at 1-800-374-2739. Thanks to them. Outrageous flavors, though. I mean, that's sort of... So I'm going through your list. This is my first time visiting your brewery. I started off with a Pilsner because that's what I do, and thank you for having one. But then, looking down the list, I mean, it just immediately falls off a cliff. And that's sort of like a good thing, because you don't know necessarily what you're going to land in. Are we... I guess if you guys are embracing outrageous flavors and flavor combinations, and I really like that sort of that three-way between fruit, botanicals, and hops as well, because looking at all three in a final product, I think can bring some really sort of fun results around. You guys are still pushing the envelope of experimentation, and I don't know if I'm just seeing maybe a little bit of a contraction in some ways of folks who are going back to the classics or rediscovering just what a straight up porter tastes like, or what a straight up Hefeweizen tastes like, or a Berliner that hasn't been treated 9 ways until Sunday, but it's just a Berliner. It is kind of fun to come in and see your list where it is all over the place with the various ingredients. I recognize a lot of the words, but I don't necessarily see them in the combination that you guys have put them in. Where does it stand for you guys with recipe development, and where your beers are now, and where you might want to take them?
Whew. Well, I think from
that
the
was a lot,
very-
right?
Yeah, no, great questions.
Yes.
From the beginning, I think I would say that our beers are mainly inspired by nostalgia, and I think our tasting notes really reflect that. Like, we're looking for flavors that are fun and like energetic, and kind of bring you to a place that maybe you're experiencing them in a new combination for the first time, but they're kind of coming from a spot that we've all been to, I think.
So this first one that I'm drinking is Bloom.
Bloom, sure.
Okay. So this is, I mean, it's guava pink. It's got some haze to it. It sort of reminds me of not necessarily the color of Hawaiian Punch, but almost it's because it's a little bit lighter than that, and it's a little bit thicker. But your tasting notes on here, and I love that on your menu. You have these tastes like for everything, and this one you're saying tastes like Friendly's watermelon roll, and for those I guess who don't live on the East Coast, it's sort of like a watermelon flavored sherbet that exists. Fruity Pebbles and the white mystery Airhead, and a red icy as well, and all of those are true. And I get that nostalgia part to it as well, because somebody who deals with tasting notes all the time, I'm often thinking like, how can I make this relatable? Mm-hmm. And for some of the other breweries that are in the area, we've had Dan Suarez on the show in Hudson Valley. He's doing pilsners and saisons and doing things that people can sort of identify with. Or if you go down to Chief's Place at Industrial Arts, it's sort of, you kind of know what you're going to get into with some of the haze and some of the other things. I imagine that this has to be a tough sell for some folks, maybe not like the uber beer nerds, but having these tasting notes that draw on nostalgia.
Yeah, well,
must
I think
help.
it's
I think it's the opposite of it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, or we try to make them, and I think they reflect like two levels of the way we think about beer. And one is a very, inviting, approachable, fun product, right? So for the most part, I'm sure there are people who aren't going to be into beer. Maybe it's too sweet, maybe it's too sour, or whatever. Yeah. For the most part, that's so fun, I think, to take a sip of a beer and be like, whoa, this does taste like a white mystery airhead, right? And that's like this real nice surface level of engagement with a product that's almost like a pop culture reference. And then underneath that are these other layers of more subtlety and more developed complex flavors that we spend a lot of time on, like fermentation character, grain, hop selection, botanical selection, that kind of reward more insights and a deeper evaluation of the beer. So what we've seen at the bar is this, like, you have the Uber beer drinkers that come in and they're really excited to pick apart some of the deeper layers of the flavors. And then you have people come in who are like, oh, I don't know if I want to even think about having a beer that tastes like a watermelon roll, but have one sip and are like, whoa, these are really cool. And then have another one and just get excited about that, like, almost immature engagement with it too, a childlike kind of thing where you can just pick out the fun of it,
So
I'm sorry,
sorry,
it's just
Jason,
because
yeah.
I think that it exists, to reiterate what Mike is saying, it's like, I think it exists at both ends of the spectrum sort of simultaneously, right? And which is why we find it compelling, and I think which is why we continue to brew this type of beer, because it can be at once both sort of densely academic and complex in procedure and technique and ingredient selection and all that kind of stuff, and also flavor arrangement, but then also like sort of doesn't have to take itself that seriously, right? And can be fun and nostalgic. And because of that, you get people who are beer geeks who get into it, but then you also get people who know nothing about beer, you don't need to know anything about the product to drink it and enjoy it. And then we also get people who are like, who straight up say that they hate sour beer and then have one of our beers and are like, wow, I've never had anything like this before.
All right, so really quick, what comes first? Do you guys want to make a beer that tastes like the mystery airhead color, or do you make a beer and then you just try to find...
Like after canning day, the whole staff gets together, we crack cans. Tasty Tuesdays around here. And yeah, we just try to think as deeply as we can about the flavors in the context of like these nostalgic flavors. But some of them are very serious notes too, depending on the beer. And we kind of just get together and riff on them until we find ones we like.
All right, so you're starting off with an acidic base, but I do think that sour is sort of a misnomer with the beers that I've had for you guys. Like it's an easy thing to say, and beer geeks sort of flock towards sour, and people. It's something that can be easily identifiable, but I don't even know if it's one of the first 5 words that I would use to describe the beers that go into the sour IPAs that you guys make.
No doubt. I think that's because we're using, like, acid is one control point of many control points, and I think that while there's a lot going on, it's balanced, and that's why it doesn't seem as sour as maybe the pH would lead you to believe, because there's other things happening in the glass. The reason why we use the sort of descriptor sour IPA is just because we feel like it's probably the closest commercial description that you can get to having someone understand what they might be experiencing.
Sure.
But I don't know, when I even hear IPA though, and I guess that, and again, going into some of these other flavor descriptors, like the hops don't play a huge role in what I've tasted in the past. Like some of them, yes, but like, even Bloom, as I'm tasting this right now, I'm not even remotely thinking about hops in the way that, if somebody says double IPA, that I would.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the way people speak about double IPA today, particularly Northeast style IPA, the word juice is the primary descriptor, right? So I think hop character is something that's pretty dynamic and changing and leaning more toward fruity descriptors these days.
Yeah.
Certainly there's as many hops in Bloom as there would be in a regular Northeast style IPA. I would say between 3 and 5 pounds per barrel or something like that.
All right.
But I think that the level of integration sort of masks its singular personality and makes it part of a whole rather than standing out in a way that it would if it were the primary flavor component.
Because I'll just mention right now. So 8% bloom, what we're drinking right now. Raw wheat, malted oat, milk sugar, cherries, chocolate, and chamomile, and hopped with Citra and Simcoe. Is at least the description that you guys are telling the public.
Yeah, but even in beers, we have a beer called Incandenza, which is just our base sour IPA. It's just 2-row and wheat and hops and fermentation. And people drink that beer and are pretty surprised there's not oranges in it or grapefruit. And what we see, and it's not, nobody thinks of that as like a super hoppy beer in the traditional sense, but we see a lot of transformation in hop character through our acidity. So even our base beers have this like, what translates more as just a certain type of sourness is really a culmination of like the hop oils integrating with the fermentation and acidity.
Yeah.
So they're transformed into this really bright orange, grapefruit, lemon, citrus character that doesn't really betray hops necessarily because you're used to thinking of them in different aromatic ways. But once in that context, I think you start to get them. And then when you see them, that kind of flavor layered on top of fruit, layered on top of botanicals, like we were saying before, the more you let it warm up, the more you drink it, the more you experience it, the deeper you get, the more you can kind of break those apart, which I think adds a lot to like the deeper, complex experiences that you can have with some of these beers.
Did you want to add on that?
No, I think he said everything.
How important is layering, though? Because I think that there's a lot of folks who, not a lot, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but when people think of juice, when they think of New England style, when they think of the modern IPA, layering is important, but a lot of the time it comes off as almost a little blunt, at least when you're first starting off. And so when you guys are thinking about, a sour double IPA, layering must come into, to play, because you guys are doing a lot of blending. You're really thinking about what's the ultimate goal, I guess, when it comes to layering and getting these flavors to what's eventually showing up in our glass that tastes like whatever.
Like I was saying before, we'll start out with one of a handful of base beers, all sour IPAs that balance residual sugar, acid, and alcohol.
Yeah.
Typically, the ultimate goal is to make something that is fun to drink, compelling, thought-provoking,
Enjoyable.
Just enjoyable. The flavor arrangements themselves, we just spend a lot of time thinking about and bouncing off of each other. And for every beer that we make, there's probably 10 beers that we didn't make because one or the other one of us doesn't like the idea. Like we're constantly texting each other like, oh, how about this? How about this? And like I think that we've gotten to the point in our relationship, both as friends and coworkers now, that like I'm not offended when Mike says that is not a good idea.
Right.
Because he says it to me so often that like you get to the point where it's like it's just part of the process, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to be willing to have bad ideas if you want to get to the good ones.
Sure.
So
What's an example of a bad idea?
we made this beer called Plumage a while back. That was probably
What was it
That
called?
was a good idea.
no. I thought it was just. I guess maybe it was a matter of execution.
Just had to
Do you
sit in
want
the
to
can
start?
a little bit.
Yeah.
It was a sour IPA with grapefruit and mint,
Okay.
which I stand behind 100%. I think it's awesome.
I like it too.
It was a little overpowering. The trouble with that beer, I think, is that there's a very harsh stigma for drinking orange juice after you brush your teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was kind of
That's what
we
you were
were going
getting?
for,
It's nostalgic.
Super nostalgic.
Uh-huh.
Some people still like that beer. A lot of people didn't like that
Yeah.
beer.
It's polarizing.
It's
for sure.
polarizing, but in some ways,
We're gonna make it again.
we make beers. Certain beers are polarizing because the flavors are kind of. We try to make them challenging once in a while. Like we make a beer with rosemary because we like to think about how that botanical edge, like that sort of herbal stuff, can fit into the context of it. So that's Hiding Place. It's a muscat grape, orange peel, and rosemary.
Jesus. Okay.
Which are, like not necessarily all friends, but
No.
we see the wine grape and this citrus acidity from orange peel kind of needed another layer, right? It was too straightforward on all that level, and what rosemary contributed to that was like a richer herbal, earthy flavor. and aroma that kind of made a more compelling and more nuanced product at the end of the day. Bad ideas. I think we were talking about making one with parsley and with kale. Or you were talking about kale.
Great.
Because we were kind of riffing
Great.
on the
Thanks,
smoothie
guys.
idea.
Uh-huh.
Well, no, was it? There was one where we were going to do green.
Yeah,
green
good luck
pea
going out of
puree.
business.
Green
Yeah.
pea puree, yeah. Maybe that's like 2020
Well, the
stuff,
thing,
who knows,
so
but-
I
You
don't
could
know.
use
I
like
think that
pea
we have
flour, right? Isn't that
the blue stuff.
yeah,
yeah,
the
I don't
purple
know.
yeah.
Yeah, that was like
Nothing
gray
wrong
when
with
I
that
put
kind
it
of
Was it
in
gray?
tablets,
Okay.
yeah.
Nothing like
I
dirty
think that-
dishwater looking beer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sort of part of what we're trying to do and what in 2019 we really want to focus on is grounding these beers in a deeper sort of more herbaceous base, right? So that it's not just fruit on fruit on fruit, right? Like having some type of depth of character to it, not necessarily vegetative, but like incorporating more botanicals, right? Incorporating things like salt, in order to like further round out the balance of the beer without having it just be all fruity.
And not just fruit in a goza, but in other recipes as well.
I don't think that we would call it a goza.
Okay.
Just like, again, using an ingredient like salt as an balancing component instead of like as a major component in the beer. You know?
Yeah. I'm curious about this whole notion of challenging people when they're tasting beers as well, because there's some thought of, beer is one of those things where, and I said this in my recent book, beer is sort of an addendum to life. We have a glass of beer on the bar, we're drinking it, we're with our friends, we might taste it at first, and then it just sort of melds into the background, as it were. And some of, I think, the beers that have been successful in life, or in the beer industry, have been sort of the ones that sort of stand in the background, the wallflowers that we pay attention to when we want to. Have we lost our way a little bit? Is it time to be challenging beer drinkers? If you're, one of 7,100 breweries that are in the country right now, is the path forward not necessarily huge distribution, but it's getting people to stop and pay attention to? Is it
Sure.
a
I think
smack in the face?
The beauty of the beer industry now is that it could be everything, and it is everything. There's enough breweries, there's enough beer drinkers, there's enough just like, internet communication and trading about beer that you can be like us and find a niche that you're good at, and enough people will want to drink it. So I think you can, and I love beer that stands in the background too, and you can have both. You can have everything every way. You can have a beer like a Pilsner that we're drinking at home, have two of those, and then have a sour IPA that's challenging, maybe.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just fun and fruity. It doesn't really matter that way. But I think one of the dangerous sides of that is trying to pigeonhole things and kind of like have it seem like it should be something. I think it's more exciting when stuff comes out that's just on its face what it is, and it's creative and it's fun and it's engaging for people. Maybe not for every person,
Yeah.
but for certain people. And like I'm saying, there's enough people out there generally, if the product's good, to help support it. It's like music or like movies or like anything else. It's just something that you find the right amount of people, the right circle of people to enjoy it. That's really all you need. Like you were saying earlier about the general brew pub style of brewing, where you try to make every style, and you
Yeah.
offer something for everybody. That's still a good thing too, I mean, I don't even want to say that that's going away. I hope it never does, because I love to go to a brew pub and have a porter and then a Pilsner and a pale ale. It's
Yeah.
a great experience. But not every bar experience, not every brewery experience has to be that, right? Nor does it have to be just sour beer on the menu either. You kind of find what you want to do well, and you do it as best you can, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we make just as much Pilsner and very traditional sour farmhouse ale as we do sour IPA. And I think that necessarily we need to do that. I think that it offers balance to the other end of the program, which is kind of wacky, and like novel and innovative and all of those things. But it's a matter of a time and a place. Like I commute from Manhattan every day up here for work. I'm drinking cans of Feel No Way or Pilsner on the train ride home,
Yeah.
while I'm like sending emails and
Sure.
doing that kind of stuff. We certainly make and drink plenty of Pilsner, and like more traditional styles. But I don't know. I think that we've sort of found our lane with sour IPA, and we enjoy making it, and that's why we continue to focus on it in that way.
How much does the raw ingredients of your grain bill? I'm seeing a lot of raw wheat and malted oats in your sour IPA descriptions. How much does that play into that style?
More and more. I mean, do you
How
want
so?
to talk about like the local farms and stuff like that?
Sure, yeah. Especially for our sour farmhouse program, where we're concentrating more on that. They're very related, these two sides of our brewery, but kind of distinct. Where a lot of our sour farmhouse programs are based on a simpler amount of ingredients, I'd say. Like our Valley beer, which is just our blended, oak-aged, very fermentation-focused, like year in oak, 4 months in bottle, really pretty, traditional kind of sour saison. There's nothing in that except grain and yeast and water. Like no hopping in that, no botanicals, no fruit. So a lot more, I think, of the nuance and the character of that beer comes from grain. So we're working a lot more with a local maltster in Germantown, maybe about 45 minutes north of here, to malt what we want exactly and to the degree we want it, but also to source like more buckwheat, more raw red wheat, more stuff that's like fresh and available and grown well, which we're seeing in the Hudson Valley a lot, and it's really exciting. But that same perspective translates to our sour IPA too, where we focus on, I think we were saying this before, sometimes we pay too much attention or we talk too much about the fruit and the botanicals in that, and that seems to like take over the curve. But just as I was saying about the way hops play their central role in this beer, it goes all the way back down to our water treatment, to our grain selection, the way that any other beer would. So in order for this beer to come through with this like silky, enjoyable mouthfeel that is a big part of why the fruit and chocolate experience is so pleasurable and not sharp, and the acidity is not overpowering, is because we have a considerable amount of malted oat, raw wheat, and flaked oat in this beer. So like you're building that layer before we're even thinking about what kind of fruits or what kind of botanicals are going to be in there. So I think it might not be as important as the fruit because the fruit's a little more ostentatious
Sure.
at the front
But
end.
you
But
couldn't
I think
have
it's
like you couldn't have the fruit without everything else.
Yeah,
The fruit,
right.
the way that it presents itself, would
Yeah.
not be as...
Yeah, the drinking experience would be different, and it wouldn't be. I don't think it would be what it is at all, right? And people, I don't think, would be engaging with it in the same way because the balance we're talking about would be a little bit off, and it wouldn't hit you the way that I think it does in the way we want it to.
And then the next part of that component is the lactose, is the milk sugar that you guys are putting
Exactly,
in
yeah.
your beers as well. And you guys seem to be unabashed big fans of...
Yeah, especially in these beers. I mean, like we're saying, sour beer for a long time when we were drinking it seemed like the objective was to make it sour. And
Yeah.
that was, like if it was sour, it was a sour beer and was ready to go to market. For us, it was always an ingredient, more or less, like a way to balance the other stuff we wanted to, part of a bigger picture. So what we were finding is that the more residual sugar we can keep in the beer, the more pleasant the experience was, the more, especially the experience of the acidity. Right?
Yeah.
So milk sugar serves a great purpose for that because it's unfermentable, right? It can stay in that beer exactly where we want it. It provides this creamy, lush mouthfeel that is just like riding right underneath the kind of brighter acidity that you feel.
Yeah.
The same is true for cocktails, and I think that this is part of where that insight comes from.
Yeah.
It's like, a Manhattan is as like revelatory as it is because of the sweetness from the vermouth. You know, like
Sure.
If you ever have a daiquiri with a little too little sugar in it, it tastes gross, right?
Sure.
So like, the presence of sugar, while I think, especially recently, is regarded as being some type of boogeyman in the industry, like the villainization of pastry stouts and stuff like that. I think if deployed,
I've probably contributed to that at some point.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's fun to do that kind of
Sure,
stuff. Right?
yeah.
But like I
Pick on
think
the
that
little
if
guy.
deployed with like sort of thoughtful hands, can be just as legitimate an ingredient as anything else. We've been using milk sugar since we were at Bacchus, and I understand that it's like become like a hot button topic for a lot of brewers these days and people in the industry. But like, again, I think that if it's used responsibly, it can be a legitimate.
But that's the key word, though, is responsibility, and I think that there are. It goes to what I was saying earlier, that there's just folks who are just kind of screwing around, or that they're not putting the thought into, or that they're just sort of using this as a blunt instrument in a lot of ways, and they're not necessarily thinking about the long term. And again, that's painting with a broad brush, but I think you're sort of proving that in there is. If you do something responsibly, if you do something where you've put in the thought, you've put in the science, you've put in the time and tested, you're going to get something that is completely different than what people are expecting. And as I just we didn't even talk about the second beer that I was drinking. So this was.
You finished that one.
I really did. Which one was this?
That's blackberry peach glycerin.
So an 8% double fruit sour double IPA with raw wheat, malted oat, milk sugar, blackberry, and peach puree hopped with mosaic. And you guys say it tastes like peach Snapple, which it actually does. Berry fruit roll-ups, Stewart's Black Raz milkshake, and grape big league chew. Good on you guys for just bringing me back to striking out in little league as at 8-year-old. And I really dug it. But what I was sort of left with as with each sip is when you think of double IPAs again and hop forward, you're often left with some residual bitterness or the hop content really sticking on your tongue over and over and over and stunting it. And what I'm sort of left with is 20 minutes after finishing a Lemonhead as a kid and having that pleasant, sweet sourness, left behind. And that, to me, is where it starts to come on, is in the after effects of what we're sort of left with, not necessarily what we're starting off with in the way that some people might think.
Yeah, I think there's particularly from the beginning, there's a lot of competing aromas in these beers, like that much fruit, or when there's botanicals added to it too, like there's a lot going on in that whiff coming out of a glass.
Yeah.
Generally in an IPA, like your first experience from opening the can or from picking up the glass is hops, right? So before you start drinking it, that's what you're thinking of. I think it takes a little while for hop character to come out of our beers, or for people to find it in our beers. Because I think deliberately it's part of, like we were saying before, the overall picture of the thing. It's one part of it. It's not the part of it.
I just want to jump back to Botanicals as we start to end or get towards the end of this interview. They can be so difficult to work with. Fresh botanicals, dry botanicals, you're going to get so much off of it. Up here, there's a limited grow season, unless you guys are getting stuff shipped in. Just talk about some of the challenges of finding, one, the right botanical, and then the timing for it as well, because it seems like you might just be, brewing from mid to late summer, and then if 2019 is going to be your botanical focus, you guys could just take the winter off because there's not a lot growing.
That would be nice.
No, we source from wherever we can for that stuff.
Yeah.
And it really is just
Provenance doesn't matter all that much of where it's coming from.
For our Sour Farmhouse program, we try to stay local. But there are two different philosophies, I think, about the beer, where some of our Sour Farmhouse beer is brewed with the intention of like finding whatever is seasonally available and using it that way. So we just put out last week a strawberry Sour Farmhouse with basil and lemon verbena.
Okay.
The strawberry side of that was done. The basil and lemon verbena were growing in the summer and provided a really beautiful contrast to it. We had tried lemon balm. It wasn't quite the same, but we were looking for that stuff, and it was grown then, right?
Mike's being humble. He grew them on his own land and picked them with his own hands.
Wow.
So it's like, but
that was I grew that basil to make pesto, and then I had too much. So it's like, it's there, For other stuff, we're often taking in, Egyptian chamomile or...
you're not growing mangoes in your backyard.
Yeah.
Our orange peel we use quite a bit. It comes in from wherever we can get it.
Yeah.
It is challenging, and we do have a lot of misses that don't make it to a can. We just tried to make a fennel pollen one, and we ordered a sample. We tried it, and it wasn't good. We didn't like the way it worked in the beer, so we left it. But there's enough out there that we can play around with.
Are most of the botanicals coming in on the cold side?
Yeah.
All of them.
All
yeah.
of them.
So we mess around in the glass a lot, like in, just in very small quantities. So we'll pull samples of either one of the blending components, which is going to sort of inform the bulk of the perception of the beer, and then steep botanicals in that. Trying a bunch of different varieties. Sometimes the original idea that we have doesn't always work. And then you realize that once it's in the glass, and we'll go through a number of different other varieties. Oftentimes we're surprised by the effectiveness of a particular botanical in a beer that we didn't expect. But yeah, I mean, we would like to get botanicals from our own area as much as we can. That's really determined by what farms are growing and stuff, and we're starting to develop closer relationships with people who are growing botanicals in our own area. But if we have an idea for something and we think it's really cool, we'll order it on the internet. I mean, the internet, like, you can get anything on the internet.
You
right?
can get
So-
anything on the internet these days. Guys, in a minute, I'm going to ask you, what did you wish you know now that you would have known back when you started? But first, I will say thank you to our sponsors. G&D Chiller is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. You can join the community of homebrewers at the American Homebrewers Association and bring the world to your brew house with select ingredients from BSG. Thank you to our sponsors. What do you wish you knew back then that you know now? Mike?
That's a tough question. I say I wish I knew that you could hire brewers under you to clean stuff.
I was gonna say a very similar
Yeah, I
thing.
mean,
You,
the way
that was
stuff has gone.
way more blunt.
Yeah, the way our company's grown, we've each had our hand in every part of it for this whole time, and the only thing I've been reflecting on lately is like how that's grown and how. I don't know if I wish I knew it. I think I like the course our careers have taken, that we've been able to see all that stuff. But maybe to redirect it a little bit, the funnest part I think of our job right now, other than making these beers, is to see other people working with us.
Exactly.
Doing things that maybe we thought of 5 years ago. It's like, wow, these ideas worked. And now we're growing a company around it. Now we're employing people, and we have fans, and we have all this kind of stuff that came out of these weird ideas that we had on our front porch 5-10 years ago, So yeah, if I had known that was going to happen 5 years ago, I would have been a little more confident then, but I think I would have followed the same course, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, really. Just like the sort of the value and power in having a team around you that you trust and believe in, who are passionate, and we would definitely not be where we are now without our own partner, John Anthony, who's not in the room right now.
Right.
But everyone around us. I mean, while we're sitting here in this office talking about milk sugar, Connor is out there actually making beer.
That's one of the perks of the job.
Yeah, I would say we should have, maybe not should have, but like hired more people earlier on, and I think we would have like gotten to where we are maybe faster, and had to clean fewer fermenters.
But you guys made it out as friends, so
I think we did everything right so far.
Yeah.
Knock on wood.
Good. Mike, Jason, brewers, co-owners of the Hudson Valley Brewery up here we're in Beacon.
Yeah, man. Thanks for
Beacon,
coming
New
on.
York. Thanks so much for having us.
My pleasure.
Thank you to all of our listeners, to our sponsors. If you have a question for me, guests you'd like to hear, topics you'd like addressed, you can reach out to me at John Hall, JOHNHOLL, at beerandbrewing.com. Or you can follow the conversation on Twitter at John_Hall. And you can go to beerandbrewing.com, and you should go to beerandbrewing.com, where you can subscribe to the magazine. You can see homebrew recipes. You can find out what's happening in this craft beer scene, watch videos about home brewing and professional brewing, and so much more. And again, we'll be back next week with an all-new episode. But in the meantime, guys, thanks for the hospitality. Thanks for the beers.
Thank you, Johnson.
For the fun walk down memory lane, as it were, as the beers start to kick in. And we'll be back next week. Thanks again. Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.